The crack of glass against granite was the only answer she gave me. One moment, the jar of apple butter, still warm from my kitchen, was a peace offering in my hands. The next, it was a spider web of ruin on the immaculate stone steps of her Beacon Hill mansion, its sweet, cinnamon scent, a sudden sickening perfume in the biting November air. She hadn't just refused my gift, she had obliterated it. And then, she shoved me. It wasn't a stumble or an accident. It was a calculated act of violence, the heel of her palm striking my shoulder with a force that stole the breath from my lungs. I was a ghost she was swatting away, a stain on the pristine marble of her new life. I fell backward, my body clumsy with shock, my hip crying out as it connected with the unforgiving edge of the walkway. The world tilted, a dizzying collage of gray sky, wrought iron, and her face, a mask of cold, sharp contempt. "What are you doing here?" Serafina hissed, her voice a low, panicked current of air. It was a voice I no longer recognized, stripped of any warmth, any memory of the girl I raised on thrift store clothes and whispered lullabies in a cramped Lowell apartment. Her eyes, the same deep cobalt as her father's, darted over my shoulder, not to see if I was hurt, but to check if the fortress-like door behind her had been breached, if any of her important guests had witnessed this inconvenient specter from her past. "The press is inside. Investors," she snapped, her words like shards of the broken jar. "People who believe my story, people who believe my mother died in a factory fire when I was a child." I stared up at her, the cold of the stone seeping into my bones. Died. The word hung in the air, a lie so monstrous it felt like its own physical entity. "Don't look at me like that," she spat, pulling the lapels of her cashmere coat tighter, as if to shield herself from the sight of me. "You are not a part of my narrative anymore. You are a loose thread, a liability. A liability. Not mother, not even a mistake. I was a balance sheet error in the billion-dollar life she had constructed." She leaned down, her face inches from mine, and her voice dropped to a tremor, not of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated rage. "Do not call yourself my mother. I am not your daughter. I am a product of will, of ambition. You were merely the biological incubator I was forced to escape." She didn't offer a hand. She didn't even flinch. She just gave a small, dismissive laugh, as if seeing a rat scurry from a drainpipe. Then, with a final withering glance, she turned, swept back inside her stone palace, and slammed the heavy oak door shut. The click of the bolt echoed in the sudden silence, a sound of absolute finality. Through the thick wood, I could hear the muffled shift in her tone, the bright, charming lilt returning as she greeted her guests. I heard the clinking of glasses, the murmur of polite laughter. Across the street, the curtains of a brownstone twitched. An elderly woman, a silhouette against the warm light of her home, watched me for a moment before letting the fabric fall back into place. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up. My hip throbbed, a deep, resonant ache that promised a bruise the color of a storm cloud. I didn't try to gather the broken glass. I left it there, a monument to the moment my daughter had not only erased me, but had tried to physically break me. Let it rot, I thought. Let the scent of apples and cinnamon haunt her doorstep. I walked away without a sound. No screams, no tears. My grief was too vast, too cold for that. The woman behind that door, this Serafina Thorne, the oracle of Beacon Hill, was a stranger. And I had just met her for the very first time. The door had slammed, but I hadn't left. Hidden by the deep shadows of a sculpted boxwood hedge, I watched it crack open again. It wasn't Serafina who emerged, but another woman, ethereal and soft, with a cloud of silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of gentle sorrow. Draped in a delicate pashmina, she looked like every idealized portrait of motherhood. Serafina took her hand, her posture softening as she led the woman toward the cluster of reporters gathered in the grand foyer. I could hear her voice, now laced with a practiced, heartbreaking vulnerability. "This is my mother," Serafina announced, her voice breaking just so. I froze, my own breath catching in my throat. She found me. After all these years, she found me. The cameras flashed, a volley of blinding light. "I was lost to the foster system after the fire," Serafina continued, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. But she never stopped looking. She worked 3 jobs, saved every penny, just on the hope that one day she'd find her little girl. The silver-haired woman, this actress, squeezed Serafina's hand, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "I always believed in her," she whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Even when the world had given up, I knew my daughter was destined for greatness." They embraced, a poignant, perfectly framed tableau of reunion and redemption. And I stood outside in the cold, invisible. No, worse than invisible. I had been replaced. That was my life they were performing. My sacrifice they were monetizing. I was the one who worked double shifts at the textile mill, my hands raw from the looms to pay for her debate club fees. I was the one who stayed up all night sewing patches on her hand-me-down school uniforms, my eyes burning under a bare bulb. I was the one who held her when she was 6, her small body racked with pneumonia, and promised her she was strong enough to breathe through the fire in her lungs. The very fire she now claimed had killed me. She hadn't just lied. She had curated a better mother. A woman with a softer story, a more photogenic grief. A mother who didn't smell of industrial solvent and exhaustion. A mother who hadn't had to scream at her to do her homework or cry in the pantry when the eviction notice was taped to the door. That woman in there hadn't earned the right to that title, but she was being applauded for it. And I, who had carried Serafina for 9 months, who had torn my body and soul to bring her into the world and keep her there, I was an inconvenient footnote, deleted from the final draft. I backed away before the door could close again, melting into the twilight. My legs felt hollow, my hands stung from the fall, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the chilling realization that my daughter had not just abandoned my love. She had packaged it, polished it, and sold it to the highest bidder. She had built her empire on my ashes, and now she was dancing on my grave. That night, I didn't go home. I wandered the cobbled streets of Boston, a ghost in my own city. I watched mothers adjusting their children's scarves, fathers lifting toddlers onto their shoulders. Life, in all its mundane beauty, swirled around me, and I felt like the one who had truly died. When I finally returned to my small apartment, I turned on the financial news channel, and there she was, Serafina Thorne, sitting on a plush leather sofa next to the same silver-haired woman. The chyron read, "From tragedy to triumph, the power of a mother's unbreakable love." "So your mother," the host began, leaning in, "she truly never gave up hope?" Serafina nodded solemnly. "I always knew, somewhere deep inside, she'd come back for me. I thought of the letter she'd written me the day she was accepted to Wharton, the one I kept in an old sewing box under my bed. 'You're my foundation, Mom. The only thing in this world that's real.' Now she called me a ghost and embraced a counterfeit. She hadn't just erased me. She had profited from my death. It wasn't about the lie anymore. It was about proof. I hired a man named Arthur Corrigan, a retired BPD detective with eyes that had seen every kind of lie Boston had to offer. I paid him with the pension I'd scraped together from 2 decades at the mill. The irony was a bitter pill, but her betrayal was poison. Arthur was methodical. He started with the public record, then moved to the shadows. He sent me photos of Serafina and the woman at galas, at charity auctions, at book signings for Serafina's best-selling memoir, Forged in Fire. They were always holding hands. But Arthur dug deeper. One frosty Tuesday morning, he laid a manila folder on my small kitchen table. The actress's name was Genevieve Dubois. She had no record of ever having a child in the foster system, no adoption papers, nothing. Before she was an inspiration, she was a bit-part actress with a string of failed auditions and 2 bankruptcies. Her only child, a son, had died from a treatable infection because she couldn't afford the right doctors. She was now playing the role of a lifetime. I stared at a candid photo Arthur had taken. Genevieve sitting in a makeup chair before a television appearance, her face half done. She wasn't smiling. She was just empty. A familiar, hollowed-out look I recognized from my own mirror on the hardest nights. I had to meet her. 3 days later, I sat in a quiet corner of a cafe in the North End, my face hidden behind a scarf and sunglasses, my heart hammered against my ribs. Genevieve arrived, looking smaller and more fragile than she did on screen. She recognized me instantly. "You're her," she said, her voice barely a whisper. There was no performance in it, only exhaustion. I nodded. "I have one question," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Your son, was it real?" Her composure shattered, tears welled in her eyes, real and unscripted. "I did," she choked out. "His name was Theo. He was 8. I lost him because we were poor, not because I didn't love him. When she offered me this part, I just wanted to hear someone call me Mom again. Just once." The hatred I had nurtured for her evaporated, replaced by a devastating shared grief. She wasn't a thief. She was a ghost, just like me, haunting the edges of a life that wasn't hers. "I don't blame you," I said quietly. "You're not the one who threw me away." She looked up, a flicker of something new in her eyes. "She told me you were the one who left," she whispered. "She said you were an addict, that you died in prison." I just shook my head. I was never gone. She just needed a better story. When we parted, she squeezed my hand, a gesture not of guilt, but of grim solidarity. That night, I went home and opened the old metal sewing box. It creaked open, revealing the truth not in headlines, but in thread, ink, and time. There was the letter from Wharton. There was a scrap of fabric from my old mill uniform, the one I wore for 3 straight days while I sat by her hospital bed when she had pneumonia. She had asked why it smelled of bleach and something else. I'd told her it was the smell of worry, and underneath it all, a poem she'd written for me in 4th grade, on paper now brittle with age. "My mom is the mountain, I am the stone. If she ever crumbles, I'll be all alone." I laid each item out on the table, the letter, the fabric, the poem. Then I took out my phone and photographed them, one by one. High resolution, no filters. Just the raw, undeniable proof of a life she had tried to bury. I opened my laptop and compiled a list. Every investor in her fund, every sponsor of her foundation, every journalist who had ever written a glowing profile. I drafted a single, short email, attached the files, and added one line at the bottom. "You are investing in a story about a mother's death. I thought you should know she is still alive." Then I hit send, to every single name. The sewing box was empty now, its contents released into the world. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it to be seen. The world, it turned out, did care. It started on a niche financial blog, then exploded. The headline that broke the internet read, "The dead mother of Beacon Hill is alive, and she kept the receipts." The story went viral, fueled by the raw power of the artifacts, my daughter's own handwriting, her childhood poem, the tattered piece of my uniform. But the real accelerant was the video. The elderly neighbor across the street, the one who had watched from her window, had a security camera. It had captured everything: the shove, the shattering glass, my crumpled form on the pavement. It captured Serafina's cold indifference as she turned her back and walked away. The footage was brutal, undeniable. By morning, it had 10 million views. The hashtags were merciless. Justice for Lara. Oracle of Lies. Apple Buttergate. The market reacted with swift brutality. Her fund's stock plummeted 63% in a week. Sponsors fled. Luxury brands issued statements condemning fabricated narratives. Her entire empire, built on a foundation of manufactured sympathy, began to crumble. Serafina went silent, disappearing from public view, only to resurface in damage control interviews where she referred to me as that woman, a figure from a complicated past. She never used the word mother. But then, the final twist came. Not from me, but from the world of shadows where Serafina had found her replacement. The headlines were sensational. Serafina Thorne's mother vanishes after embezzling $5 million from charity fund. Genevieve Dubois was gone, but her real name, it turned out, was Deborah Kilroy. A grifter, a professional ghost who specialized in preying on ambitious young women with a story to sell. She'd done it 3 times before, playing the long-lost mother to CEOs who found sympathy more profitable than truth, only to vanish with a piece of their fortune. Serafina hadn't just been a liar. She'd been a fool. The very woman she paid to replace me had conned her, too. A week later, a letter arrived, postmarked from Belize. No return address. The note inside was from Deborah. I was never her mother. I just wanted to feel what it might be like to be someone's reason for healing. You were never the ghost in this story. You were the anchor. And anchors don't have to be seen. They just have to hold. I folded the letter. My daughter was now truly alone, just as she had always claimed to be. But this time, it was real. The phone rang at 3:07 a.m. I knew it was her. Mom. Her voice was a fragile thread, the voice of the little girl I remembered, not the titan of finance. I know I don't deserve to call. She told me everything. The lawsuits, the IRS investigation, the board abandoning her. She was ruined. Mom, she finally whispered, the word laced with a desperate transactional hope. They say you have money. She was right. A patent for a weaving process I'd developed at the mill, something I'd filed away and forgotten, had been licensed by an aerospace company decades ago. The royalties, managed by a quiet trust, had grown into a fortune she could only dream of. Please, she begged, help me fix this. I'll do anything. I'll make it right. We can... I walked to the window and looked out at the small crabapple tree in my yard. I had planted it from a single seed I'd found in the pocket of my coat the night she pushed me, a survivor of the shattered jar of apple butter. I had planted it, and against all odds it had grown. Do you remember that day on the steps? I finally said, my voice calm and clear. Silence. When you closed the door on your mother, I continued, you opened another door for yourself. A broken sob on her end. Yes. I will not be opening any more doors for you, Serafina. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in a very long time, I slept through the night. Not out of peace, but out of release. My life is quiet now. I didn't write a book. I declined the documentaries. Revenge was never the goal. Survival was. And I have survived. I tend my community garden in a lot where a factory once stood. The neighborhood kids call me Elara. One of them, a little girl named Chloe with scraped knees and a wild imagination, helps me plant seeds. She doesn't know my story. She just knows I always share my apples. I have survived longer than the story my daughter wrote for me. I am not a headline or a scandal. I am the woman who plants things in the earth and watches them grow. My own daughter tried to bury me, to rewrite my existence into a tragic backstory for her own gain. But roots are stubborn things. They don't need applause to hold on. They don't need to be seen to provide strength. A real mother, a real foundation, never truly disappears. Even when she is erased, replaced, or declared dead, she lingers. In the taste of an apple, in the shade of a tree, in the quiet, unyielding power of a life that simply refuses to stop growing.